All right, so in this particular example, what I'm going to look at is how we actually load in data that we would need for this experiment. So the way we're doing this is what I'm giving you guys is CSV files, and MATLAB has a command called CSV read. So a CSV file is what's called a comma-separated value file or comma-separated variable file. All right, that's a pretty typical sort of data file that you come across in the real world. What that looks like, a CSV is basically a spreadsheet or can be loaded into a spreadsheet file. This is a CSV file, and it's the type of file that comes off of the oscilloscope. And what I see from this, okay, is a bunch of information that this provides to me from the oscilloscope directly. So a bunch of information about what firmware is on the scope, what the oscilloscope is, different things about the probes 10 to 1, what the units are, things like that. And then after that, it has this huge laundry list, this big table that basically reads out 125,000 points roughly of data. So 125,000 points. So this is the time vector, and this was the actual value recorded at that time. Okay, so what I see is at time -4 milliseconds, the value that was recorded was -1.79 times 10 to the -9. All right, and then I see that the time, if I look at what's going on in the formula bar there, you can see the time is going up closer and closer to 0. Okay, so this is an example file. So what I see is to load that in, I use this CSV read command. And the CSV read command basically takes a file name, which is a string, and then a row number where the data starts and a column number where the data starts. Okay? and then effectively a range over which I need to take data from this thing. So in this particular instance, what I need to do, what I want to do is I want to take the time vector out of this column, and I want to take the data vector out of here. So let's look at how I did that in MATLAB. Okay. So in this case, what I have is this VA file, VTAC file, and IA file. So what I have is file names, which are .csv files. And in MATLAB, anytime I want to write a file name, it's a string, so I have to put it in these single quotes like this. So VA file is apparently in this T0187 channel1.csv file. Now your files will have different names. Obviously, we renamed them from this. But it's essentially what it is. Okay? So what I tell this thing is, let's say I want to load in the voltages. So that would be the data here in channel 1. That would be this column. What I would do is I'd say, okay, VA is equal to the result of the CSV read command when applied to this VA file variable. And that variable, of course, is the string that is the name of the file. The data begins in row 16, column 1. Now, if you read the MATLAB documentation carefully, what it says is row 0 and column 0. Row 0 is actually row 1. Column 0 is column A. So if I said R1, the row is equal to 0 and the column is equal to 0, that would refer to cell number A1. So in this case, when I say row 16, column 1, that refers to what begins here at row 17 in the B column. Okay? So I'm saying I begin at that point. Now what this is selecting the range that I want to pull. And what it says is the range begins at row 16, column 1, and ends at row 125,015, 125,000 points later at column 1. And I can do the same thing for this guy. Now from one of those files, I read out a time vector. So T, I'm reading out from the VA file, right? And I'm saying, in this case, the only thing that's different is I say that starts in row 16, column column 0. And so you see time is in the A column. A column is column 0. But I give it similar range parameters. Now in your case, each of your files, you have a voltage file, a current file, and a VTAC file. Each of those, which if I look at the values, there's a VA, IA, and VTAC full, and a VA, IA, and VTAC zoom. The zoom, all of 3 of the zoom files at each voltage were recorded at the same time, so their time vectors are exactly the same. And all of the full values at each voltage were also recorded at the same time, so their time vectors are the same as well. Okay? So if I run this in MATLAB, I go to my command window, that's loaded some data. So if I look now, I see that VA contains that vector of all the voltages. IA contains that vector with all the currents, and T is the time vector. So I could do something like this. If I wanted to see what I brought in, I could do something like TIA, right? And now I can see the corresponding current at the corresponding times. Similar with VA. Okay? Loading in data is a pretty straightforward process. Hopefully you guys will figure that out pretty easily.